living a frugal lifestyle is a fantastic way to get ahead with your finances. Perhaps you're in a situation whereby, you're on hard times, or you need some extra money, or in my situation where it's more for a peace of mind. It's good for the mental health almost, this sort of lifestyle, particularly when you're living the loner lifestyle. Hey, and welcome to video 13 now of my 30-day challenge, whereby I try and speak for 30 days, unscripted and unedited. And this episode is going to be talking about the frugal lifestyle and, how I live it in my loner life. Now, first I thought it'd be good to try and describe what a frugal lifestyle is. And I've been thinking about this for most of the day. This is a late recording for me, one of the weekend recordings in the house. But the way I try and describe it is someone who is living below their means, so below what they could live like if on their current income level, for some particular reason. So because they're saving money or because of the situation they're in, and also in a way whereby you're not too concerned with how other people perceive you. That's sort of my attitude towards it. So I'm not too concerned about what people think about me when it comes to all this sort of frugal living. I'll tell a quick story actually about when I was at university, emphasizing this. So when I was at university the second time, I was the only non-privately educated person in my accommodation, and I don't know anything about luxury brands, to be honest, nothing at all. Where I'm from, the most premium shop we have is H&M, so if you're shopping there, then you're seen as doing pretty well for yourself. So anyway, I was at university at a social gathering, and one of the people there was showing off what looked to me like just like a leather bracelet, like a cheap leather bracelet, the kind you'd buy perhaps if you were on holiday in Spain on the beach. Someone would scam you into buying this particular like braided leather bracelet, and everyone was so impressed with this bracelet. And the person showed me, and I was like, okay, what is it? And everyone else was like mortified at my question, because it turned out it was some sort of like exclusive Louis Vuitton bracelet or something along those lines. And I still don't really care about that, but at the time this seemed to be very important to them. And I would say that is not an example of frugal living. Yeah, anyway, so about myself then. So I'll just tell some stories about times that I had to live frugally, either by necessity or by choice throughout my life. Now, the first time I can remember the seeds of frugality planting themselves in my mind, in my outlook of life, was when I was 16. So when I was 16, as soon as I hit that age, my mum, so my parents were separated. My mum made me go to the local corner shop, so the local co-op that is, and get a job there. And at the time, I guess I thought it was my idea. I wanted the money. I really wanted to work on the weekends, even though I was in full-time education. And I got a job there, working Saturdays and Sundays, and I kind of hated it, but I got the money. Now, as soon as I started making my own money, my parents stopped buying me food or anything along those lines. I had to buy my own food and prepare my own food. They provided me, free rent and bills and such, but at that point onwards, I was on my own, and it seemed like a novelty at the start. I could finally buy my own ready meals. We never had ready meals when I was young, because my parents, they always cooked home meals, like home handmade meals, which is something I do today actually. And I suppose is an example of frugality in this day and age. But they always cook meals, and eventually I got to the point where I felt like I'd been scammed almost. But because I was spending my own money on these things now, I had to start considering before buying things. I wouldn't be able to just buy the best things all the time, or the expensive ready meals or pizzas or anything, or expensive takeaways. We never had takeaways either when I was young. That's a bit of a strange one. And yeah, that was the earliest seeds of frugality. And this went on until I went to university. And Yeah, so when I went to university the first time, so I went 2 times. I dropped out the first time, unfortunately. I'd come into some inheritance, so I wasn't wanting for money or anything. I could completely cover all of my accommodation and everything, and I had spare money. And unfortunately, I completely squandered this gift. So by the time I dropped out of university, I was just broke again. It was not good. And, the first thing I wanted to do when I dropped out of university was to go back to university again. And this was an issue because I'd already used up most of my funding and the government had just tripled university fees. So, yeah, that was a bit of a challenge. So this was the first time I had to live frugally, um, without it being a choice. So I had to work like crazy to earn the money to pay the university fees that I would be paying when I returned to university. Um, and yeah, it was just a case of, fortunately, again, living back at home, but living as cheaply as possible. So I worked at a supermarket called Marks and Spencer's, and the only way I was able to save up huge amounts of money was by cutting back on my main expense, and that was food. And fortunately for employees, they had this thing called the waste shop. So every evening, when the shop closed, all reduced items could be purchased by employees for a quarter of the price of the reduced ticket value, which was pretty good because it's quite an upmarket supermarket. So I was eating quite well for not very much money at all. On top of that, I didn't really have any other hobbies or interests that I spent money on. I just played video games. And this is a piece of advice, I suppose. So, video games, they're kind of looked down upon by society, but they're a great way to save money, I'd argue. Unless you're like spending loads of money on microtransactions and all that stuff. That wasn't really around back when I was saving money. You just play the video games and it would just take up all your time. You didn't have the time to go out and get drunk and spend money on things you don't really need. All you're thinking about is your video games, playing them with your boys and such. But yeah, that's a good frugal hobby, I would say. So yeah, moving on from that, I was able to get back to university a second time, and bizarrely, I had another windfall whereby I had another inheritance almost at university. Once again, I of course completely squandered this. Um, it's a bit of a pattern here, as you can see. So at university, I was fairly carefree the second time again, which is a huge shame. I look back on all the money that I've inherited and got a hold of in the past, and if I just was more responsible with it, I would be much more set up now. But at the time, you don't really think about this sort of thing. So I finished university the second time, got a degree this time, and I was down to my last couple of £100, so I was not in a good situation, financially at all. This was another frugal necessity phase of my life. I didn't have the option this time to move back home because all my family had moved overseas. So I had to move to the city where I fortunately got a job, and I lived in the dingiest shared accommodation that you can imagine. Like, at least it was in walking distance of work, I suppose, if you consider half an hour a good walking distance. But it was a 9-bedroom house. The people I shared with, they weren't students, so that's not what I was used to. So they were just random people who had a lot of problems, perhaps in some cases, but they had no respect for keeping quiet and, not stealing other people's things. So I had to just stay in my room all the time, basically. I'd cook in my room, and I would just cook lentils and rice. That's all I'd eat for the first couple of years of living in this situation, until I was able to move on to a different and perhaps better situation. And I didn't mind it that much, to be honest, once you get into the habit of this style of frugal living. Because at the time, I did have this idea in my head that I was saving up to go back to university a third time. I was kind of an eternal student in that respect. Fortunately, that's faded away now. I've got no desire to go back to university at all now. Um, but yeah, I was able to live very frugally, and then I was able to get into a situation where I had my living expenses paid for me by my employer. Um, and even then, when I was able to save 100% of my wages almost, because I had a second delivery, like a food delivery gig on the side. Once I was able to do that, I was eventually able to buy a house, which I was quite happy with. I was able to go from basically broke to owning a house within I think it was within 5 years. I can't remember exactly, actually. I got to check this one again. So yeah, frugal living allowed me to get into this situation where I can own my own property, which is quite nice. Of course, I got a mortgage on it, but I was able to save up for the deposit through this style of frugal living. And the only advice I had really was to not spend beyond your means. So, like, don't buy a load of junk you don't need. Like, I don't buy any clothing whatsoever unless I absolutely have to. I don't have a car. My only hobbies, I suppose, are making these videos now. But at the time, it was just old video games, watching, things on YouTube, I suppose, and just working. I didn't really drink much at the time. Well, this became a problem at one point after I bought the house, but that's another story. But I didn't have any huge vices at the time to waste all my money on. I'm happy with the cheap things in life when it comes to food. So I was eating lentils and rice for 2 years, and like whey protein as well, just a cheap whey protein. And yeah, that's how things were for me, I suppose. Now, I have the house, but I still continue this frugal living, mainly because I've just gotten used to it, in one respect. And the second thing is because I'm absolutely terrified of living in poverty as a pensioner. Like, I'm worried I did start the investing and paying attention to my pensions and investments and such, and the money I'd be able to have for retirement a bit late in life. However, when I see my colleagues, they are all drowning. They're all drowning in debt. They're not thinking about retirement whatsoever. I guess they just assume something will happen and it'll be okay. But I can't judge them for it. That's the way they've chosen to live their lives. They don't want to hear what I have to say. A loner just in the office, who's just keeps himself to himself. But yeah, would I recommend the frugal lifestyle? I suppose if you're not very materialistic and you don't, obsess over flashy things, then yes, definitely. Is it different from minimalism? I think minimalism is more, it's very similar, but there does seem to be some aspect of buying specific things that, let's say expensive things that you haven't intended use for, perhaps branded items, something along those lines. When it comes to me, I just don't buy anything. So I think it's a bit different. But anyway, thanks for listening, and I'll be back tomorrow.